Hello, I want to thank everyone for joining the webinar today. This is Joanne Alfafara showing you how to submit repeating items to a SharePoint list using the CAML approach. So we have a quick presentation for you today. The goal of this webinar is to give you a really short InfoPath demo. Usually just takes 20-30 minutes of your time. As usual, the webinar requires audio. And at the end of the webinar, we'll also have some time for questions and answers. First come, first serve. Post your questions whenever you have them. So moving on with my slide here, Qdabra Software, our sponsor, provides this weekly webinar. Qdabra Software has a vibrant InfoPath community. We guarantee 90% response to any InfoPath-related questions you may have. Well, most of you might already be familiar with our free forum site, which is InfoPathDev.com. We also provide quick support if you've got a problem with InfoPath, or if something's blocking you, you need help, you can hire us for some ad hoc pay-as-you-go support options. We also do consulting work, and we offer lots of tools and sample forms, tools that can be very helpful for not just InfoPath developers out there, but also for InfoPath beginners. So in the last week's webinar, we showed you how InfoPath forms can submit repeating data to a SharePoint list using CAML. And that topic has brought a lot of interest, and several people have asked for a detailed demo showing how to do that. So these are the key takeaways for today's webinar. You're going to see a detailed how-to steps for the CAML technique that we showed you in the past week. You're also going to see some of the cool techniques about how to integrate InfoPath form with a task list using the same CAML approach. And you're also going to see some cool InfoPath dashboards at the end of this webinar, which can enable rich features in InfoPath, like showing you thumbnails. So at the end of this webinar, you'll get all the samples if you just fill out our webinar feedback form. So, like I said, the CAML technique that we showed you in the last week is an out-of-the-box XML-based language that has been available out there for a while, and people use it to define fields that are used in SharePoint sites and lists, but not many people know that they can use this language with InfoPath to submit repeating data. And so we found a way how to do that by using this cool technique. And we're going to show you today how to configure your form to use that CAML technique. But before we do that, let's have a recap of what this CAML does and how it submits repeating items to a list. So I'm showing you SharePoint 2010 with my expense report form library. Just trying to fill out the fields here. So this is a repeating item field, and we're going to see what will happen next if I submit this form. The expense report is now submitted, and if we refresh the items here, you'll see the submitted items there. So how did we do that? we did that using this CAML technique. And today we're going to demo how we actually did that using the expense report. But as much as I want to show you the actual expense report, for now I'm going to show you a very simple form that we created that uses this CAML technique. And the first thing you want to do is build your CAML template. If you don't know how to build your CAML, you can use a CAML builder like this, which I used for this method. It's called U2U CAML Query Builder. It's available free for download. And it's a very cool tool because it allows you to connect to SharePoint and to your SharePoint list. And from here, you can configure your CAML by just selecting the fields here. I didn't even have to type this. It just generated this for me. I selected the columns here from my SharePoint site. So once you configured your CAML XML, you're going to have something like this. Paste the CAML template in a notepad like that and save that as a .xml file. And then you're going to need to create a query data connection, an XML data connection to that CAML XML like I have here. I have a CAML XML data connection that uses that XML file. And so this is the CAML XML and how it looks in the data source right here. So I have a fields repeating data in here. I'm using date, description, amount, like that, to show you how these input values can be submitted to that repeating CAML field here. So the goal of the form is to submit these input values to the fields, the repeating field of the CAML here. Now, in order to create that method, you're going to have some rules in your form, and you can put that anywhere in your form. But in this example, I'm using a button here that sets the field of that CAML form or that CAML XML template to the value of the item field here. But this is actually not right because it's an issue we found with CAML. So in order to demonstrate that, I'm going to fill out the form here. So you see that it just copied the number 3 to all of the fields here, which is not right. So how did we provide a solution for that? Is we used a copy attribute to the XML CAML template. So instead of using this CAML template, you're going to want to have something like this with a copy attribute fields corresponding to each field name of the CAML template. So by using that CAML XML, you can now set the repeating field. So you're first setting the copy date attribute to the value of the repeating item. And then inside the CAML XML, if you look at the attribute field here, you're going to see a rule that sets the repeating field of the CAML template to that copy attribute. So to show you how that works, this is the CAML solution form, and just filling it out again to show you that it's now copying the values into the field of the CAML template. So that's how CAML works. Once you've got the field copying here correctly, you can now submit the items, the repeating items, to the SharePoint list. So going back to my slide here, so the first thing you want to do is, like I said, build your CAML using a tool if you don't know how to build your CAML. And you also need to add the fields in your form. 6 very important fields: form name, expense ID. In this example, we're using expense report. So the parent ID of the expense report in that form library, we named it expense ID. And you're going to have a list name field, which has a default value of the list grid that you're using to submit to. And then under the repeating item table, you'll have 3 fields: submit action, list item ID, and unique ID. All of these fields are being set via rules in InfoPath. So the next step is to add the query data connections. You're going to need to have query data connections to the expense report and the expense items. The expense report is the form library where the form submits to, and the expense items is the SharePoint list where you are submitting the repeating data to. Then you're going to create a submit connection to the update list items web service. And you're going to use the fields that you've added as parameter to that update list items submit data connection. For the list name parameter, you're going to use the list name in that form that you're using. And then for the updates parameter, you're going to use the batch node from the CAML template. So the next part is adding the form logic, which is all of the rules that are involved in making this CAML template work. Let me quickly go back here in the actual XML or expense report form to show you where the rules are. So the rules you can see here, I have opened the form load. There is a rule here that sets the form name to some value here. So each time you submit the form, that form name will always be the same. When you go to the submit button here, you're also going to see some rules that submits data to the form library. And once the data is submitted to the form library, you're going to query the expense report ID or the form ID of your form and set the expense ID field to that ID. You're going to need to have that in order to have that parent-child relationship to the child data in the SharePoint list. So after that, you're going to have a loop for the item submit that sets the submit action to true here. And then you're going to resubmit the form with the item data and then close the form. But, well, that's actually not all the rules. You see here that you have the submit action. So let's look for that submit action field right here under the item. There you go. So you're going to see a bunch of rules here that sets the command to update and to new. So if the item is if the list item ID is not blank, that means that the item is already submitted to SharePoint list. You want the command to change to update, but if you're submitting new items, the command will set to new. So maybe you're wondering where is that command field is. So the command field is in this CAML template. So it's this field. And in the CAML template, it's being set to new by default. So you're going to need to change that on the fly when you submit the form. So going back to my submit action here, after setting the command field to update or new, you're going to submit the items to the list. So this is where the actual CAML action happens. So like I showed you earlier in the very simple form, it's going to set the copy attributes of the CAML template to the values of the item field here, like date, description, category, etc. And then after you've specified the values for the copy attributes, you're going to submit the items using the web service update list items here. And then you're going to need to query the IDs for future updates. So for the last part of the rules, if you check the CAML template and click one of the copy attributes, you're going to see one rule for each that sets the field to the value of that attribute. So that's basically what this form is about. It uses CAML to submit repeating data or repeating items to a SharePoint list using a very tricky rule. So going back to my slide here. So this is just a quick summary of the technique and how to build that expense report with the CAML method. It's just very tricky because you're using out-of-the-box method here, and it really requires your time and patience and understanding of how the logic works. So for the bonus, we're also showing you some of our cool techniques here using the same CAML method. We've devised another expense report form to submit task items to a task list. So this is a very different expense report. With a task section there. But it's not showing any task right now because we haven't submitted the form yet. So we're just filling out the form here real quick. Okay, so my expense report form is submitted, and if we refresh the task list, it should have the data for, or the item for that expense report task. If we open that form, you're going to see the task in this task section, and you can select the task. You can add some comment, and let's say submit this for approval. And once submitted for approval, it's going to show you another task that's created. For example, an accounting department approves this task. So if you refresh the task list, the task items are also updated. Okay, another technique about this method is using dashboards to display repeating items. And this is one cool dashboard that we created. It's a support incidents form. And how did we make it look like this? It's actually a very simple form. It's like nothing here. But when we publish it to the site, it can look like this. And how did we do that? We added the form to the form library as a web part. And we're showing that form as an InfoPath web part, and we're hiding the actual form library that's showing the form items here. So only this dashboard shows up. So those are just one of the cool techniques that you can do with InfoPath, CAML, and making InfoPath dashboards. So I guess we can move on now to the Q&A portion. Does anyone have any questions? Okay. Well, I hope everyone can hear me now. Some are saying that they can't hear me. So the first question here from Dick Penny, where does the CAML XML text reside? It's residing as a data connection in the form. So you query that XML using a data connection in InfoPath. Are these slides available? Yes. If you fill out our feedback survey, you're going to get the slides and all the package included in this webinar. From Brian Perryman, off topic, John, I'm trying to implement side-by-side versioning of InfoPath forms via content types. Okay, this is a different topic. Maybe you can post that question, Brian, to our InfoPath forum site, infopathddev.com, and we'll respond to you. How do you hide the library for the dashboard? Okay, so we hide that by editing the page. If you edit the page, and edit this web part, there's a setting here that will allow you to hide that form library and just show the dashboard. Question from Tom Renfro. Can the CAML XML be stored in a UDC library? I don't think you can convert an XML data connection to a UDC file because the convert to connection file here is disabled in InfoPath. Okay. From Frank Westmoreland, will the dashboard and how you created them be included? Yes, they are all included in the webinar package. Gren Ernberg, will this work with Office 365? Yes, because update list items definitely works with Office 365, and this technique doesn't use any other web service at all, just update list items. And using CAML and XML is will definitely work in Office 365. So I guess there are no more questions. Some here are comments. Thank you for commenting. Again, thank you for attending the webinar, and I hope we'll see you again next week. Thanks. Have a great day.